On a bitterly cold winter morning, a woman stood in the snow, holding a sign she never wanted to write. Puppies for sale. She wasn't selling hope, she was trying to save it. What she didn't know was that a former Navy SEAL K-9, still haunted by a war he thought he'd survived, was about to stop, take a closer look, and change the lives of 3 people forever. This isn't a hero story. This is a story about one night, one choice, and how kindness, given without restraint, can end even the longest winter. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe for more. Winter pressed down on the outskirts of Denver, the kind of cold that didn't howl or rage, but waited patiently, seeping through coats, shoes, and resolve, turning breath into thin white ghosts that vanished too quickly. The bus terminal sat half forgotten at the edge of the city. Concrete platforms dusted with snow, benches slick with ice, the digital arrival board flickering as if unsure it still had a purpose. Commuters passed through with hunched shoulders and fixed eyes, each person wrapped tightly inside their own urgency. Jack Miller moved among them unnoticed, a tall figure in a dark jacket that still carried the squared stiffness of military tailoring. At 38, he stood broad-shouldered and solid, built not for show but for endurance, with a posture that never fully relaxed. His hair was cropped short, dark brown threaded with early gray at the temples, and a trimmed beard framed a jaw set by years of holding words back. His eyes, steel gray and habitually alert, scanned the terminal the way they once scanned rooftops and doorways, even though there was no mission left to complete. He had no destination. That had become his routine since leaving the Navy SEALs 3 months earlier. Walking kept the nights quieter. Walking kept the memories from gathering too close. There was no dog at his side, no familiar weight of a K-9 leash in his hand, only the echo of it, like a limb that still itched after it was gone. The absence followed him everywhere, heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. Near the far end of the platform, something disrupted the rhythm of his steps. Not movement, but stillness. A young woman stood beside a lamppost where the snow had piled higher, her boots soaked through, her shoulders drawn inward against the cold. She was small, maybe mid-20s, slender in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than choice. A wool coat hung loosely on her frame, its seams frayed at the cuffs, the fabric darkened by melting snow. Strands of chestnut-brown hair slipped loose from beneath a knit hat, clinging damply to pale cheeks, flushed red by the cold. Her eyes were what held him. Tired, yes, but steady, focused forward with a resolve that didn't beg for permission. In her gloved hands she held a piece of cardboard, edges soft and sagging from moisture. The black marker letters were uneven, written in a hurry. "Puppy for sale, please." The word please was smaller, as if added afterward, an afterthought she hadn't wanted to admit. At her feet sat a German shepherd puppy, no more than 8 or 9 weeks old. His coat was thick but still soft with youth, black along the back and ears, tan bleeding through around his muzzle and paws. One ear bent forward while the other flopped stubbornly to the side, giving him a perpetually uncertain expression. He trembled, not dramatically, but in small, controlled shivers, pressed close to the woman's boots as if anchoring himself to her presence. His eyes were dark and wide, reflecting the movement of the terminal, but they kept returning to her face, checking, always checking. Jack slowed, then stopped. He had seen desperation before. It was loud on battlefields, frantic and sharp. This was different. This was measured. The woman wasn't calling out. She wasn't stopping people or holding the sign higher when someone passed. She simply stood there, letting the cold do its work, letting the decision belong to whoever chose to see her. People did see. They glanced, winced, murmured things meant for no one in particular. A man in a business coat shook his head and walked on. A woman slowed briefly, her gaze softening, then hardened as she looked at her watch. The flow continued. Jack felt a familiar pressure in his chest, not anger yet, but recognition. He had worn that same stillness once, standing guard over something fragile with no guarantee it would matter. The woman noticed him watching. Her grip tightened slightly on the sign, but she didn't step back. She lifted her chin just enough to meet his eyes. Up close, he could see the faint shadows beneath them, the kind left by sleepless nights. Her lips were dry, cracked from the cold, but she didn't look away. "My name's Emily," she said before he could speak. Her voice was quiet, steady, with no rehearsed pitch to it. "In case you were wondering," Jack nodded once. Jack. He didn't offer his last name. Old habits lingered. His gaze dropped to the puppy. "How old?" 8 weeks, Emily answered. "Maybe 9. She hesitated, then added, "His name's Buddy." At the sound of it, the puppy lifted his head. His tail thumped once against the concrete, tentative, hopeful. He studied Jack carefully, then leaned forward to sniff the air, nose twitching. Jack crouched slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. His knees protested against the cold ground, but he ignored it. He removed one glove and extended his hand, palm down. Buddy approached, sniffed, then pressed his cold nose briefly against Jack's fingers. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a sharp, unexpected ache through Jack's chest. He withdrew his hand and stood again, clearing his throat. "You don't look like someone trying to make money," he said quietly. Emily's jaw tightened. For a moment, Jack thought she might retreat, shut down, but instead she exhaled, a long breath that fogged the air between them. "I'm not," she replied. "I just don't have another option that keeps him alive." Jack studied her face, the way her shoulders squared when she said it, bracing for judgment. He recognized that, too, the discipline of someone who had already decided what they were willing to endure. His mind flickered briefly to desert mornings and impossible choices, to men who carried unbearable weight without complaint, because the alternative was worse. The wind shifted, biting harder. Buddy whimpered softly, pressing closer to Emily's leg. She knelt immediately, rubbing his chest through her gloves, murmuring to him in a low voice Jack couldn't quite hear. Her movements were practiced, protective, not the gestures of someone giving up lightly. Jack glanced around the terminal again. No cameras pointed this way. No officials nearby, just snow, concrete, and people pretending not to notice. He felt the old instinct rise, the one that had never asked permission, only assessed risk. "There's a storm coming tonight," he said. "Bigger than this?" Emily nodded. "I know." Jack hesitated, weighing words the way he used to weigh routes and exits. "I've got a place not far from here," he said finally. "Just a cabin. Nothing fancy. I'm not offering to buy him." He paused, making sure she understood. "Just somewhere warm. For the night." Emily looked up at him, really looked this time. She took in his stance, the controlled calm in his voice, the way he kept his distance instead of reaching. Her eyes flicked to Buddy, who had turned fully toward Jack now, tail wagging in uncertain arcs. "You don't even know me," she said. Jack met her gaze. "That's true." The silence stretched, Snow began to fall more steadily, soft flakes settling into Emily's hair and on Buddy's back. The puppy sneezed, then, without prompting, took 2 small steps toward Jack and sat, looking up at him as if a decision had already been made. Emily's breath caught. She stared at Buddy, then at Jack. Something in her expression shifted. Not relief, not yet, but the loosening of a grip she'd held too tight for too long. "Just for the night," she said, her voice firm, as if making a contract with herself. "That's all," Jack nodded. "That's all." He turned, starting toward the edge of the platform where his truck was parked, then paused to make sure she followed. Emily gathered the cardboard sign, hesitated, then folded it once and slipped it into her coat pocket. Buddy trotted beside her, close enough that their legs brushed. Jack walked ahead, matching his pace to theirs, aware of the strange, quiet weight settling into his chest. Behind them, the terminal swallowed the space they'd occupied, snow filling in their footprints almost immediately. The sign was gone. The cold remained. But something had shifted, subtle and irreversible, as 3 figures moved away from the waiting city into the falling white. The snow thickened as they left the terminal, the flakes growing heavier and slower, as if the city itself were exhaling. Jack led the way without rushing, keeping his pace measured so Emily wouldn't feel chased, and Buddy wouldn't have to struggle to keep up. The truck waited at the edge of the lot, an older model with salt-streaked doors and a dented tailgate, the kind of vehicle chosen for reliability rather than appearance, and Jack unlocked it with a quiet click that sounded final in the cold air. Inside the cab, the heater wheezed to life, pushing out air that smelled faintly of dust and pine cleaner. Emily hesitated before climbing in, brushing snow from her coat with quick, embarrassed motions, as if she were stepping into a space she didn't deserve. Buddy hopped up first, paused slipping briefly on the worn floor mat before he settled, curling instinctively against the door. Jack watched the way the puppy pressed his body sideways, making himself small, and felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever he saw a creature preparing for impact before it happened. They drove in silence at first, the road narrowing as the lights of the city thinned behind them. Jack kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, the faint scars on his knuckles catching the dashboard glow. Years ago, those hands had guided dogs through smoke and rubble, had trusted instincts sharper than any sensor. Now they rested on cracked vinyl, the absence of a leash beside him louder than the engine. He didn't ask questions yet. He'd learned long ago that truths came easier when they weren't hunted. Emily spoke when the road dipped and the trees began to close in. Her voice was softer now, stripped of the edge it had worn at the terminal. "I didn't plan to be there today," she said, staring at the passing snow through the windshield. Her profile caught the dim light. Straight nose, lips pressed thin, a faint bruise yellowing near her jaw that makeup couldn't fully hide. "I planned to be invisible." She swallowed, fingers threading into Buddy's fur as if anchoring herself. Jack glanced at her once, then back to the road. He noticed the way she sat angled away from him, shoulders turned slightly inward, a posture shaped by habit rather than fear of him specifically. "You don't look invisible," he said, not unkindly. It wasn't a compliment so much as an observation, the way he'd once told a recruit he didn't look unprepared, just tired. Emily let out a breath that trembled despite her effort to control it. "I left last night," she said. "I waited until he fell asleep, took my backpack, my wallet, Buddy, and that was it." She didn't say the man's name. She didn't need to. The story lived in the spaces between her words, in the way her jaw tightened when the truck hit a bump. He never hit Buddy. That was my line. The one thing I said would end it. Buddy shifted at the sound of her voice tightening, lifting his head to look at her with worried eyes. Emily immediately softened, stroking behind his ears in slow, repetitive motions. Jack recognized the reflex, the way caretakers hid their own panic to steady something smaller. "My dad gave him to me," she continued, "right before he got sick. He said I needed someone who wouldn't leave when things got hard." A faint, humorless smile flickered and disappeared. Turns out he was right. The road climbed, the truck's headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the falling snow. Jack felt the words settle into him, heavy but familiar. He had known men who carried tokens from lost fathers, wives, brothers, small anchors against a shifting world. "Why the sign?" he asked gently. "Why not a shelter?" Emily's shoulders rose and fell. "They're full," she said, "and the ones that aren't. They don't take dogs like him unless you pay, or unless you're willing to sign something that means you won't ever see them again." She shook her head. "He's not paperwork to me. He's family." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked away quickly, ashamed of the sound it made. Jack nodded. He had signed forms that did the same thing, that erased names and turned lives into lines of ink. "You were trying to buy him time," he said, "not sell him." Emily looked at him then, surprised, and for the first time since they'd met, her eyes filled, not spilling over, just shining with the effort of holding everything in place. They turned off the main road onto a narrow track where the snow lay undisturbed, branches arching overhead. Jack slowed, navigating by memory as much as sight. "This is just for the night," he said again, the promise kept deliberately small. "Storm passes, you decide what's next." He meant it. Control mattered, especially to people who'd had it taken from them. The cabin appeared through the trees, a dark shape against the white, smoke barely visible from the chimney. It wasn't large. One room, a small kitchen, a narrow loft, but it stood solid, wood weathered and honest. Jack cut the engine and stepped out, the cold biting instantly. He moved first to the door, checking the latch out of reflex, then stepped aside so Emily could see the space before committing to it. Inside, the air was cold but still, carrying the faint scent of old wood and iron. Jack lit the lamp with practiced ease, the yellow glow spreading slowly, revealing a simple table, a couch patched at the seams, a rack of coats by the door. Emily stood just inside, scanning corners, exits, the way people do when they're calculating risk. Jack noticed and didn't comment. He crouched to Buddy's level, unclipping the makeshift leash Emily had fashioned from a scarf. "You're good here," he murmured, voice low and steady. Buddy wagged once, cautious but hopeful. Emily finally moved, setting her backpack down and shrugging off her coat. In the lamplight, Jack could see the full extent of her exhaustion, the fine tremor in her hands, the dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked younger and older all at once, a woman shaped by responsibility before she'd learned how to ask for help. "I don't need much," she said quickly. "Just until morning." Jack nodded, already feeding kindling into the stove. "That's what the place is for," he replied. He didn't explain that the cabin had once been his refuge after missions, a place where silence didn't judge him. Tonight it would serve a different purpose. As the fire caught and warmth began to spread, he felt the tension in the room ease by degrees, like a muscle slowly releasing. Buddy circled twice before settling near the stove, his body relaxing as the heat reached him. He let out a long sigh, the sound small but profound, and pressed his side against Emily's boot. She sank onto the couch, watching him with an expression that mixed relief and grief, as if she were mourning the version of herself who hadn't had to make these choices. Jack busied himself with the kettle, giving her the space to breathe, to decide what truths she wanted to lay down in the warmth. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, the storm asserting itself at last. Emily drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them, and looked at Jack across the room. "I don't know what happens after tonight," she said. Her voice was steadier now, anchored by the fire and Buddy's warmth. "But thank you for not trying to fix everything." Jack met her gaze, the lines at the corners of his eyes softening. "Sometimes," he said, choosing the words carefully, "getting through the night is enough." The fire crackled in agreement, and as the snow began to fall harder outside, the cabin held, sheltering 3 lives that had intersected by necessity and choice. For now, that was all the promise there needed to be. The storm arrived without drama, a steady thickening of snow that softened the forest and erased edges, turning the night into a slow, white breath around the cabin. Jack kept his movements deliberate as the wind rose, not hurried, not apologetic. He checked the latch, slid a wooden brace into place, and then stepped back, hands open, giving Emily the space to decide where she wanted to be. The cabin was small but honest, rough-hewn walls bearing old tool marks, a single window fogging at the corners, a stove set into stone that had absorbed decades of heat and silence. Jack's jacket came off and hung on a peg by the door, revealing a fitted thermal shirt stretched across a chest built by years of load-bearing discipline rather than vanity. He moved like someone accustomed to not being in the way, a habit formed when too much presence could cost lives. Emily chose the couch near the stove, not the loft, not the doorway. She sat with her boots still on, as if ready to leave at the first sign she needed to. In the lamplight, her features softened and sharpened at once. Freckles emerging across a pale nose, the bruise near her jaw more visible now, a faint tremor in her hands she tried to hide by rubbing warmth into Buddy's ears. She was careful with her voice, careful with her posture, careful with where she looked. Care had become her armor. Buddy pressed his small body against her shin, the black and tan fur at his shoulders, lifting and falling faster than it should have, then slowing as the heat reached him. One ear finally lifted, the other still unsure, and his tail made a tentative sweep against the rug. Jack set a kettle on the stove and fed the fire with 2 measured pieces of split pine. The flame caught with a low, patient sound, and he crouched to adjust the damper. The light flickered across the planes of his face, scarred knuckles, a shallow line at the corner of his mouth that deepened when he thought too hard, eyes that tracked changes in the room without appearing to stare. He did not ask questions. He did not offer reassurances. He let the warmth speak first. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves and pressed snow against the window, the storm claiming the forest in long, quiet strokes. The power went without ceremony. One moment the lamp hummed faintly. The next, it stuttered and died. Jack reached for a match and lit the oil lamp again, its glow smaller now, more intimate. He checked the breaker out of habit, then accepted what the night required. He didn't curse. He didn't sigh. He adjusted. Emily noticed that. She watched him not for what he did, but for what he didn't. No frustration, no control exerted, no commands disguised as kindness. When the darkness settled into its corners, she felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched for weeks. Jack laid an old army blanket on the floor near the stove and stepped back, a clear invitation without instruction. Buddy needed no invitation. He circled twice and flopped down with a soft grunt, belly exposed to the heat, paws twitching as if he were learning how to rest again. Emily hesitated, then slid off the couch and sat cross-legged beside him, her back straight, her eyes never leaving Jack's hands as he poured hot water into two mismatched mugs. Steam rose, fogging the lamplight. He set one mug within reach of her and then took the other for himself, sitting on the chair opposite, an equal distance away. The wind climbed in pitch, a living thing now, and the cabin creaked in response. Emily's shoulders lifted at the sound and then settled when nothing followed it. She sipped the water, the heat surprising her into a small, involuntary sigh. "You don't have to stay up," she said, immediately regretting it. The words came out too fast, too concerned with his comfort rather than her own safety. Old habits again. Jack met her eyes and shook his head once. "I'm fine," he said. "Storm like this, it's better to listen." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. His gaze drifted to the window, then back to the door, then to Buddy's small chest rising and falling more evenly now. He was listening to the structure, to the weather, to the rhythm of the room. Emily watched the way his attention moved without claiming anything, and the tension in her hands eased another notch. She spoke again later, when the fire had settled into a steady burn and the wind's voice smoothed into something almost constant. "I keep waiting for the catch," she said, eyes on Buddy's ears as they finally relaxed. "For the moment where I realize I misunderstood something." Her voice was quiet, stripped of accusation. It was an honest confession, the kind that came when the body felt safe enough to tell the truth before the mind caught up. Jack leaned back slightly, careful not to loom. "There isn't one," he replied. "If you want to leave in the morning, you leave. If you want to sit here and say nothing, that's fine too." He paused, choosing precision over comfort. "I won't make decisions for you." Emily nodded, absorbing it. The words landed differently than promises. They didn't demand trust. They allowed it. She shifted, stretching her legs toward the warmth, and Buddy adjusted without waking, his paw sliding to rest against her ankle. The contact startled her. How quickly he had claimed this place, this moment, and tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them away and rested her hand on his side, counting breaths until her own matched his. The storm intensified, snow piling against the door, muffling the forest. Jack rose and checked the seal along the frame, then returned to his seat without comment. He felt the familiar pull of memory, the desert nights when he'd kept watch while others slept, the weight of responsibility humming beneath the quiet. Tonight felt different. There was no perimeter to hold, no threat to anticipate. There was only a room that needed to be allowed to be what it was. He realized, with a small, surprising clarity, that he wasn't saving anyone. He was offering a pause. A pause could be powerful. It could be enough. Emily's eyes grew heavy despite herself. She fought it, chin lifting, and Jack noticed the effort. "You can sleep," he said softly. "I'll keep the fire going." He stood, fetched another blanket, and placed it within reach without draping it over her. No touch without invitation. She stared at the blanket as if it might vanish, then pulled it around her shoulders. The relief that crossed her face was brief and profound, the kind that came when the body finally believed the words it had been told. She slept in fits at first, waking to the wind, to the pop of sap in the fire, to Buddy's small sighs. Each time, nothing changed. Jack remained where he was, the room unchanged, the night contained. Eventually, her breaths deepened, her shoulders sinking into the couch. Buddy rolled onto his side, ear flopping fully now, his tremors gone. Jack watched until the rhythm of the room synchronized, fire, breath, wind, and then allowed his own eyes to close halfway, listening with the rest of himself. Sometime near dawn, the storm eased. The wind loosened its grip, and the snow fell straighter, quieter. The cabin held the night's warmth, a cocoon of amber light and wood smoke. Emily slept through it, the first unbroken sleep she'd had in longer than she could remember. Jack noticed the absence of tension in her jaw, the way her hands lay open instead of clenched. He felt a cautious, unfamiliar steadiness in his chest. Not hope, not yet. Something smaller and sturdier. When morning light finally filtered through the window, pale and clean, Jack rose to feed the fire one last time. Buddy lifted his head and thumped his tail once, greeting the day as if it had always been kind. Emily stirred, eyes opening slowly, confusion flickering and then dissolving as she took in the room. She sat up, blanket sliding to her lap, and met Jack's gaze across the space they had kept between them. "Thank you," she said simply. "No qualifiers, no debts implied." Jack nodded. "You're welcome." Outside, the forest stood quiet and white, the storm spent. Inside, 3 lives occupied the same shelter without chains, without claims, without promises that reached beyond what the morning could hold. For now, that was enough. Morning came quietly, the kind of pale winter dawn that made the world look newly forgiven. Snow lay smooth and undisturbed around the cabin, softening the forest floor and weighing down the pine branches until they bowed like tired shoulders. Jack was awake before the light fully settled. Habit, not alarm, pulled him from sleep. He moved carefully, keeping the floorboards from creaking as he crossed the room. Emily and Buddy were still asleep near the stove. Emily curled on the couch, her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. Buddy pressed against her legs, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. Jack paused a moment, watching, then turned toward the door. Outside, the cold bit sharper than the night before. Jack stepped onto the porch and scanned the clearing, his eyes adjusting quickly. At first, everything looked untouched, pristine. Then he saw it. Near the edge of the trees, where the snow dipped slightly, 2 parallel grooves cut through the white. Tire tracks. Fresh. Not the shallow marks of a delivery truck turning around days ago, but deep, deliberate impressions made by something heavy, something that had come and gone while the storm covered its retreat. He crouched, brushing snow aside with a gloved hand. The tread pattern was aggressive, meant for winter roads, not casual driving. His jaw tightened. This wasn't coincidence. He followed the tracks with his eyes until they disappeared beneath drifting snow, his mind already reconstructing angles and timing. Someone had been close enough to know this place existed. When he returned inside, Emily was awake, sitting upright with the blanket around her shoulders. Her hair was mussed from sleep, chestnut strands catching the firelight, freckles standing out against skin, no longer pale with cold, but still marked by fatigue. She watched Jack's face carefully, reading him the way she'd learned to read danger long before it announced itself. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Jack didn't soften the truth, but he didn't sharpen it either. "Someone drove out here last night," he said. "Didn't stop long." He nodded toward Buddy, who had lifted his head and was watching Jack intently now. "I need to check something." Emily's hands tightened in the blanket. "Check what?" Jack knelt beside Buddy, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle him. He ran practiced fingers along the puppy's neck and shoulder, not searching roughly, but methodically. Buddy wriggled once, then settled, trusting the hands that had kept him warm through the storm. Jack felt it then, a small, firm shape beneath the skin near the scruff, old scar tissue around it. A microchip? Emily's breath caught. "I didn't know," she said quickly, panic edging her voice. "I swear, I didn't—" "I know," Jack interrupted gently. He straightened, meeting her eyes. "This isn't something you put there. It's old, poorly done." He exhaled through his nose. "It explains the tracks." Emily stared at Buddy as if seeing him for the first time. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They told me he came from a private breeder. I never questioned it. I needed him." Her shoulders curled inward, guilt surfacing like a bruise pressed too hard. "They said if I ever couldn't keep him, they'd help rehome him." Jack felt a familiar cold focus settle over him. He'd heard versions of that language before. Different victims, same script. "They don't rehome," he said. "They reclaim." The day passed under a thin layer of tension. Jack didn't tell Emily what he suspected would come next, but he prepared. He checked the phone signal. Spotty but usable. He moved tools closer to hand, cleared snow from the porch steps to prevent slips. Nothing aggressive, nothing that would escalate. Preparation, not provocation. Emily watched him with quiet understanding, her trust no longer blind but informed, chosen. As dusk fell, the forest grew dense with shadow. The temperature dropped again, hardening the snow into a slick crust. Buddy paced near the window, ears pricked, tail low but steady. He let out a short, sharp bark, not panicked, just alert. Jack moved to the door and listened. Then he heard it. An engine, low and muffled, idling too far away to be accidental. He raised a hand, palm out, signaling Emily to stay where she was. She nodded, clutching the blanket, her face pale but composed. She didn't freeze. She didn't run. She stayed. Two figures emerged from the trees minutes later, shapes darker than the night, boots crunching softly on packed snow. They were men used to being outdoors, used to being unnoticed. The taller one walked with an easy confidence, broad through the shoulders, his beard thick and untrimmed, frost catching in it as he breathed. The other was leaner, younger, his movements sharper, restless. Both wore heavy coats and gloves, practical and anonymous. Neither looked surprised to find the cabin lit. Jack stepped onto the porch before they reached the door. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, feet planted, posture calm and balanced, a silhouette shaped by years of discipline. "You're on private property," he said evenly. "Turn around." The taller man smirked, taking another step forward. "We're just looking for a dog," he said, voice casual, almost friendly. "Black and tan, belongs to us." "Not anymore," Jack replied. The younger man shifted, glancing toward the trees, calculating distance. Snow made the ground treacherous, and Jack knew it. He let them make the first mistake. The taller man lunged, slipping as his boot lost traction. Jack moved then, fast but controlled. He caught the man's wrist, twisted just enough to force the crowbar from his grip. It hit the snow with a dull thud. The second man rushed in, but his footing betrayed him too. Jack redirected his momentum, sending him sprawling. No punches thrown, no rage, just physics and timing. Inside, Emily watched through the window, heart hammering. Buddy barked sharply, placing himself between her and the door, his small body rigid with purpose. She realized then that he wasn't afraid. He was choosing. By the time the men tried to recover, Jack had them pinned, knees in snow, hands secured behind their backs with zip ties he kept for emergencies. He spoke calmly into his phone, giving clear coordinates, his voice steady as he called the sheriff's office. Red and blue lights cut through the forest not long after, reflecting off snow and bark. The deputies moved in quickly, weapons drawn but lowered when they saw the scene. Questions followed, statements taken. Emily stepped onto the porch then, wrapping her arms around herself, Buddy at her feet, barking once more as the men were led away. One of the deputies, a middle-aged man with a lined face and tired eyes, looked at Jack with quiet respect. "You did the right thing," he said. Jack nodded. "Just kept it from getting worse." When the cars disappeared and the forest returned to silence, Emily sank onto the porch step, tears finally spilling. Buddy climbed into her lap, licking her chin, tail wagging hard now, proud and certain. Jack stood nearby, watching the snow fall again, lighter this time. The trail they hadn't seen was gone, erased by night and consequence. What remained was simpler, safer. Inside the cabin, warmth waited, and for the first time Emily believed it might last. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, retreating the snow a few inches at a time, loosening winter's grip the way a clenched fist slowly learns to open. The forest around the cabin changed first. Icicles thinned and vanished. Pine branches lifted themselves back toward the sky. The air still held cold at dawn, but by afternoon it softened, carrying the scent of wet earth and sap. Jack noticed these things without trying to. For the first time since leaving the teams, his awareness no longer felt like vigilance. It felt like presence. The investigation moved faster than Jack expected. Within days of the arrest, county officers returned with state investigators. They were methodical men and women, dressed plainly, their voices calm and procedural. One of them, a woman in her early 40s named Karen Doyle, led the questions. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her dark blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, pale skin weathered by years of field work. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind, the gaze of someone who had learned to separate empathy from hesitation. She listened more than she spoke, taking notes as Emily recounted what she had been told by the so-called breeders, how contracts were framed to sound helpful while quietly transferring ownership back to them. Karen nodded often, not surprised. "You weren't careless," she said at one point. "You were targeted." The words loosened something in Emily's chest she hadn't realized was locked there. The microchip led them further than Jack had expected. It tied Buddy to a network of backyard breeding operations spread across 2 counties, each one feeding into the next. Dogs were inventory. Emily had been a temporary caretaker in a system designed to reclaim assets, not protect lives. The arrests that followed were quieter than the first, conducted with warrants and paperwork, but their impact rippled outward. For the first time, Emily watched consequences unfold without feeling responsible for them. Justice did not ask her to suffer again in order to be earned. With the immediate danger gone, choices returned. Real ones. Emily began spending mornings in town, first at the small legal aid office that handled her protective order, then at a modest veterinary clinic just off Main Street. The clinic belonged to Dr. Laura Bennett, a woman in her mid-30s with sandy blonde hair worn in a loose braid, freckles scattered across sun-warm skin, and a posture that leaned forward when she listened. Laura spoke quickly but worked gently, her hands steady even when animals panicked. She had grown up on a farm and carried that unshakable calm into every exam room. When Emily explained her situation, Laura didn't pity her. She asked what Emily knew, what she could do, what she wanted to learn. By the end of the week, Emily was cleaning kennels and assisting with feedings. By the end of the month, she was training as a veterinary assistant. The work grounded her. It gave her days a shape that wasn't defined by fear. Buddy grew alongside her. His legs lengthened, paws oversized and clumsy, ears finally deciding to stand on their own. The black along his back deepened, the tan on his legs warming into rich gold. He followed Emily everywhere, but his confidence bloomed in Jack's presence too. When Jack walked the trails at dusk, Buddy trotted beside him, checking the wind, learning the forest. Jack never trained him like a service dog. He didn't issue commands that weren't necessary. Still, Buddy watched him closely, absorbing calm the way dogs do, mirroring it back without judgment. One afternoon, after paperwork had been signed and fees paid quietly by a victim's assistance fund, Jack stood at the county office with a pen in his hand. Adoption forms lay on the counter. His name filled the line marked Permanent Guardian. He hesitated only once, then signed. The relief that followed surprised him. It wasn't ownership he felt. It was responsibility freely chosen. Buddy leaned against his leg, tail wagging as if he understood the significance of ink and paper. Emily stood beside them, hands folded, smiling through tears that came without pain this time. "You don't have to stay," Jack said later when they returned to the cabin. He said it because it mattered that she knew. He said it because freedom had to be named aloud to be real. Emily nodded. "I know," she replied. She looked out at the clearing, at the snow retreating into shadowed corners. "I want to." They didn't define what that meant. They didn't rush to shape it into something permanent. They let days accumulate. Let trust grow legs before asking it to run. Jack noticed changes in himself that he didn't announce. He slept through the night more often. When dreams came, they loosened their grip faster. The silence of the cabin no longer pressed in on him. It breathed. He found himself fixing things, not because they were broken, but because he wanted to make them better. A step repaired, a window sealed, a hook added by the door for leashes and coats. He spoke more, laughed once, startled by the sound. Emily noticed too. She noticed how Jack no longer positioned himself between her and exits, how his shoulders eased when she returned late from the clinic, how he asked her opinion about small things, where to plant herbs in spring, whether the old table was worth sanding down. Each question was an offering, not a test. She answered honestly, learning to trust the sound of her own voice again. The sign stayed in her backpack until one quiet evening when the fire burned low and the sky outside glowed soft and clear. Emily took it out, the cardboard creased and faded, the letters smudged by melted snow. "I don't want to throw it away," she said, uncertain, "but I don't want it to hurt any more." Jack considered it, then fetched a simple wooden frame from a shelf. They pressed the sign flat together, smoothing its edges, fitting it behind glass. When they hung it on the wall near the door, it didn't look like shame. It looked like evidence, proof of a moment survived. Spring arrived properly after that. Grass pushed through the last thin crusts of ice. Birds returned, tentative at first, then bold. Buddy chased them with puppy enthusiasm, skidding to a stop when Jack called him back, not with command, but with tone. Emily laughed freely now, the sound no longer checking itself. She stood taller, her face open to the sun, freckles deepening, eyes clear. One evening, as light lingered longer than it used to, Jack stood on the porch watching Buddy roll in the grass, legs splayed, unbothered by dignity. Emily joined him, leaning against the railing. The air smelled of thaw and possibility. Jack felt a quiet certainty settle into him, not loud enough to be declared, strong enough to be trusted. The war had not vanished from his past. It no longer defined his present. Inside, warmth waited. Outside, winter had finished saying what it needed to say, and what remained was enough. Sometimes the most powerful rescues don't look like heroism. They look like a door left unlocked on a cold night, a choice to listen instead of judge, a hand extended without strings attached. In everyday life, we rarely get the chance to save someone all at once, but we are given countless chances to give people enough safety, dignity, and time to save themselves. This story reminds us that healing doesn't come from control or grand promises. It comes from patience, respect, and the courage to choose kindness when it would be easier to look away. Whether it's a struggling neighbor, a frightened animal, or even a part of ourselves still carrying old wounds, compassion is never wasted. It always leaves something stronger behind. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can return, even after the longest winter. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, or share a moment in your life when a small act of kindness changed everything. And if you believe stories like this matter, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of courage, healing, and second chances.